Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's conversation. I'm Mark Hamill on behalf of Naked Headhunter Leadership Transition and Virtual Advisory Board. Delighted to welcome Gerard Ratner on today's call. Good morning, Gerald. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, extremely well.
You said you got some sun shining in London today?
Yeah, I've got the sun glaring straight at me. It's like a summer's day. Absolutely boiling hot. Incredible.
Fantastic.
I'll be out on
Fantastic.
my bike later.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Well, Jared, look, we're gonna play a little quick video. Huge thanks to you for taking the time to share your story, which is absolutely incredible, with the guests today. We're going to play a little video, and then we'll go straight into our conversation. But Gerald, thanks so much again for giving us the time.
Thank you for asking me, Mark. Do appreciate it.
We also do this nice sherry decanter. It's cut glass, and it comes complete with 6 glasses on a silver-plated tray that your butler could bring you in and serve you drinks on. And it's really only cost £4.95. People say to me, how can you sell this for such a low price? I say, because it's total crap. There's no point beating around the bush. Anyway, our Ratner's shops will never win any awards for design. They're not in the best possible taste, I admit that. In fact, some people say they can't even see the jewellery for all the banners and posters smothering the shop windows. So it's interesting that these shops, that everyone has a good laugh about, take more money per square foot than any other retailer in Europe. Why? Because we give the customer what they want. In our shops today, jewellery is largely bought on impulse, especially in our Ratner's and H. Samuel divisions. The look of the shops, with pop music playing, garish colours and bright lights, is worlds apart from the old-fashioned jewellers. Before 1984, Ratner's was one of those old-fashioned jewellers. In those days, nothing in the windows was priced. Today, everything in our windows is clearly priced and clearly described. The old jewellers used to lock the door behind you. They probably bolted them as well when you came in. Now, when our shops are open, you'll see no doors, we take them away. Before 1984, the average item in a jeweller's shop cost over £300. Today, in our shops, jewellery is no longer a luxury. It's about £20 on average. We even sell a pair of earrings for under £1, gold earrings as well. And some people say, well, that's cheaper than a prawn sandwich from Marks and Spencer's. But I have to say, the sandwich will probably last longer than the earrings, but anyway.
Gerald, who was that young firecracker there? I'm not sure who. Some semblance.
Like yesterday.
Yeah. Gerald, look, we have the title for the conversation today, The Man Who Destroyed His Multi-Million-Pound Business in 10 Seconds. It does kind of relate to that speech a little bit. We believe there is some people on the audience who mightn't have heard your story. So could you share a little bit of context, and then we'll go into some of the questions that have been put forward?
Yeah, sure, Mark. As I said, it seems like yesterday, but it was in fact 31 years ago. And I was quite honoured because I was invited to the Institute of Directors annual conference. It was April 22nd, I think, 1991, or April the 23rd. And it was at the Albert Hall. There are going to be 6,000 people there. And it was, they normally would invite the businessman that's doing really well, which was us, because we just announced the day before profits of £125 million. And the other speakers was President de Klerk of South Africa, Norman Lamont, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So, you know, I was a little bit nervous. I turned up very early. They told me to go to gate 13 and at the Albert Hall. And there was a whole reception committee waiting there, including even minor royalty. I'm thinking this is a bit over the top, but of course that it was because I was early. This reception committee was for President de Klerk. It wasn't for me, but it's and that's how that started off. That's the way it started off. And listened to President de Klerk's speech, which was excellent. But of course, it wasn't the president of South Africa who actually made a big announcement that he was going to end apartheid. That hit the headlines the next day. It was somebody who made a joke about a sherry decanter and also the prawn sandwich joke. That was the one that was all over the newspapers the next day. There was no mention of President de Klerk. But that obviously was more interesting to their readers than the end of apartheid. And it still, for some reason, had this fascination. Here we are talking about it.
Yep.
31 years later, probably because of, there's a bit of Schadenfreude in there, but obviously, as I said, we were doing very, very well up to that speech. As soon as, there was no social media, obviously, in 1991, but as soon as it hit the Sun, which then had something in the region of about 17 million readers. Today it's got 3 million readers, so all those readers are now on Facebook or whatever.
Yep.
And the Daily Mirror ditto, not quite as much, but had huge coverage. So pretty well everyone knew about it, because it was plastered on the front page of both tabloids. And of course, they didn't exactly write the story as accurately as it was. It was a joke about a sherry decanter. But I'm not criticizing the press or blaming anybody else other than myself. But they did say, you know, I said it about all my jewelry, and that has stuck. Where in fact, in that speech, if you listen to the whole thing, I actually talked about that we sell quality products at low prices, but we do have one or two items that I joked about. But the press said that everything is
junk or something. Yeah.
And it wasn't a joke; it was serious. And of course, that had a disastrous effect on my business. Primarily the Ratners. People just think of it as a Ratners chain, but in fact, it was a group with H. Samuel, Ernest Jones, Watches of Switzerland, 1,000 shops in America, Zales, and we had 50% of the jewelry market. But as soon as the speech, you know, people started talking about it. Nobody would buy their engagement ring from Ratners, and then they discovered that I owned H. Samuel, which was even a bigger blow to us because our H. Samuel division was 3 times the size of our Ratners division, and they started suffering. Watch Switzerland, Ernest Jones didn't suffer because they were selling very expensive stuff and people didn't relate it to me. But nevertheless, it had also coupled with the recession of 1991, from being 30% up in the shops, we were suddenly 30% down. I mean, it was the most dramatic turnaround. The brand went toxic, and I struggled, as you know, for the next 18 months to try and deal with the problem, which was impossible, quite honestly. And then I hired, as a last desperate measure, a bit like Liz Truss brings in Jeremy Hunt, I brought in a chairman and I would drop down to chief executive to try and save the day, you know, so I wouldn't front it, he would front it, I would disappear. The result was that he fired me. So maybe that was what happened to us as well.
And maybe, Gerald, just to get a sense on, I mean, many of our listeners are kind of CEOs, presidents in transition. I mean, that's kind of people who've had their head down for 20, 25 years building a career, and for, you know, different reasons are now kind of struggling to kind of figure out or exploring, you know, what's out there. Many have kind of reputational impact on businesses they've been involved in before. Maybe could you look or share a little bit the immediate kind of emotional impact, and then a little bit the bounce back, because I mean that's such an incredible voyage, and dealing with, I mean, we find when we talk to execs who go through it, I mean it's a feeling of loneliness is kind of the number one feeling. Oh my God, like why me? And how to deal with that, and then even to, you know, hit a point when you and the support you can take to kind of start facing things again and looking at coming back.
Yeah, I mean, it was the worst 18 months of my life because I'd built up this business in a 7-year period from a loss-making chain, family business, 130 shops, losing £34,000 to the biggest jewelers in the world. We'd even conquered America, and I was very proud of what I'd achieved. And I just could not believe that I'd lost all of that through making a stupid joke at the Albert Hall about a sherry decanter, that it would have that effect. It was, you can understand if, a recession happens and you really struggle or you get into debt, but over something as daft as that. And it wasn't only me. I could see all my staff, young people that I'd given them a chance, losing their jobs. And it was just a slow, painful death, quite honestly. And it was, I can't say to you, nobody died or anything, but it was my life, and it was incredibly painful. And it wasn't a matter of the money. I did lose a lot of money because the share price had gone from £4.20 to 2p, and I had all my money in shares, and I had share options and stuff coming on. So I lost a fortune. I never for 1 minute thought about the money side of it. It was just purely the fact that I'd lost my baby, my business that I built up, which I loved. And I'm not making anybody feel any better. It's just lost a job. I can't. You will suffer. And there's no point in saying, just have a cup of tea and everything will be all right. Painful
cup of tea and a prawn sandwich, you'd be fine.
Yeah, prawn sandwich. That's a good one. But the thing is that, so it does take time. And it was 7 years for me. Where I basically believed everything that was said about me in the press. I was unemployable, and I just felt that I was finished, basically. But when I did come back, opening, because the one thing that was keeping me sane was cycling, which I still do to this day, cycle 25 miles every day. The one thing that was keeping me sane was cycling, and I could see the benefits of exercise, which everybody does today, but it was 1997. So I wanted to open up a health club, which I did without any money. And it was when I was sitting in that porter cabin building this health club that I began to feel good again. I was working again. Okay, the porter cabin was my office. It wasn't quite the same as the office in Mayfair that I had, which was about 40 foot long, full of antiques. It was a porter cabin, but I felt better in that porter cabin than I did in my Mayfair office when I was running Ratner's, purely because I was back in business, and I never thought I would be. So when you really suffered somewhat, it's great when you get bounced back. When you come back, it's a fantastic feeling. You really appreciate running a business or building something, which I did from scratch with the health club. So in a way that you have to lose something to really appreciate it. So maybe if Liz Truss stays on and somehow wins the election, which I'm not saying she will, I mean, that's a real long shot, but she will really be the happiest prime minister that ever lived because of what she went through. And that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. What would you have kind of, Gerald, for anybody who's going through that uncertainty? Because look, if someone can say, look, in 12 months, you'll be fine, you'll be back up on your feet, you just got to suck it up and get through it. But there's no guarantees. I mean, like you said, you talked about a 7-year kind of transition for yourself. What kind of guidance or shared experience? You mentioned the cycling, which is wonderful. What other kind of tips or guidance would you have, Gerald, for people who are trying to figure it out and bounce back?
Well, the thing is that I was in a very bad place, and I was basically lying in bed watching Countdown in bed. That's how low I'd fallen, and I didn't want to feel like that anymore. I felt so terrible that I actually went to a psychiatrist who prescribed me Prozac, and yes, I began to feel not so bad, but then I'd lost that will to bounce back. I was just happy to just sit around doing nothing. So I lost the sharpness, and people were saying that my conversation They didn't want to sit opposite me at a table because I didn't speak. So that didn't work for me. And I'm not saying antidepressants work for other people, but you know, you do get into a very low place. People don't realize that. They always talk about mental health today and stress, and it's often set off for bloody good reason. It's not just an illness. It's because you've lost a lot of money, you've lost your job, and it's not only the money. You feel personally that you've lost your mojo, that you know you don't have any pride left. You feel sort of just stupid. So yeah, I then started cycling, and that was the turning point. Whereas the Prozac didn't work for me, the cycling really did work. And going up hills, really steep hills, which I've got around here, was, you didn't worry about, you know, being unemployable or losing a job. You just wanted to get up that hill. It's long, but also your mind was clear, and I had my best ideas today when I'm cycling. So the health club not only was cathartic and got me back on my feet, you know, I also got back into the black from having all those debts after losing the company. I'd sold it for £4 million after 2 years. So, and that was a fantastic feeling.
Maybe share a little bit, Gerald, on, you mentioned kind of at having dinner and communication, and I presume that feeling of like anger and bitterness, and how do you kind of work through those emotions?
Well, you do feel that very, very, very unhappy, but you know what I would say to somebody who has been through what I've been through, or to say to somebody who hasn't been through what I've been through, is just sail through life with no problems whatsoever in business and had the Midas touch. You meet somebody like that, and you often feel that they lack a certain amount of empathy, a certain amount of sympathy. So there is a benefit of going through what I went through. You know, to be part of the human race, you have to have suffered somewhat, because it makes you a much more caring person, a thoughtful person, and an appreciative person. So, you know, like my example of Liz Truss, there's always a silver lining to all these things. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But at the time, it was a horrendous situation, because I used to walk into a room and people used to come up and chat, and they'd laugh at what you said. Everything you said was funny, and you had a huge amount of confidence. I was invited, I remember, to a 50th birthday party at San Lorenzo and Beecham Place. I was about 44 at the time. And I remember walking into that room before we sat down for dinner, and there was a crowd of old friends. And they looked, as I walked to join in with them talking, they looked at me like I was some sort of street accident. You know, I was a totally different person to them as I was before. There's no question about that. That people are quite superficial in terms of, they look at you if you've achieved a lot, and whatever you say is funny and whatever you say is clever. But if you've had a setback, a disastrous struck, you know, then I go back to Liz Truss. Everything she says at the moment is hopeless. Nobody's going to take any notice of her because of her situation. Whereas 2 weeks ago, when she became Prime Minister, everything she said was wonderful. And that's the situation you get into. And you think, how do I get out of it? How do I get out of this situation? Because that's what you want. You don't like being there. Yeah.
No, and I'm sure that we come across it a lot, that I mean, people who've been fired from their roles through even no particular fault of their own, just business is going a different direction, or through M&A or whatever, and suddenly you're, after 20, 25 years, you're out on your ear trying to rebuild and figure it out. And I think there is that, you know, there is a feeling of like failure that's very difficult to overcome. I mean,
but that's business is like that. If you're in the, and I'm not having a go at the public sector, but if you're sort of in the, you know, if you're in the public sector, you don't have that risk. To a certain degree, you're protected. But in the private sector, business is the people that take the most risks are the most successful, but you can come unstuck. People don't realize that it's very, very risky.
Yeah.
And 1 minute you can be up there, 1 minute you can be down there. That's the nature of the beast. It is difficult. It is very difficult. And unless you embrace those challenges and risks, you're not going to achieve anything. But, a lot of the best businessmen have come so close to going bust and have benefited from it. Yeah. So, all I can say is, advice to somebody who went through what I went through, it will make you stronger, and you will learn the lessons. And I certainly won't make the same mistakes that I've made again.
Just two questions, Gerald. One on kind of support, and you mentioned kind of bumping into people. Was there like a core circle or people who were there who you still could trust and who could give you support to help you get back on track, or were you just like shutting down in terms of just not wanting to deal with other people?
Yeah, you do tend to shut down because you're embarrassed, and you don't want to deal with people. But then, I was invited to Buckingham Palace and 10 Downing Street quite a lot in my heyday. That obviously that had dried up, so you knew who your friends were. In terms of, there is this cliche about who your friends are when you fall flat on your face. And there is a certain amount of truth in that, but you have got this core of half a dozen people that stick by you, one or two good friends who are not friendly with you for your money or for your success or anything like that. And obviously your family, who've been fantastic with me. My wife's been an absolute rock through all of it. People used to say to her, why didn't you, surprised you stuck with him? So, well, she shouldn't marry me for my money, why wouldn't she? But the thing is that, and people seem to think that just if you've lost your money, that you've lost everything.
Yeah.
But you do know who your friends are, and a lot of people did drop me. There's no question whatsoever. People that not people that I met socially, but people in business, which you thought were your friends, that you had round to your house, the stockbrokers, the estate agents, the bankers, those sort of people, estate agents, the people that we had a business
relationship with,
that died.
And Gerard, maybe talk through a little bit that rebuild, the cycling, like you said, kind of getting the blood flow, getting the little gray cells kind of working again. Was there also a feeling of, look, I just need to do it. I want to like prove like people wrong or prove to myself I can do it again. And maybe just those little milestones that you set for yourself to kind of start that rebuilding process.
No, I'd basically given up, and I didn't want to play anymore. I was lying in bed thinking, if you're in a room with a smell, not actual, but you don't actually smell anything till you go out into the fresh air and realize what you're missing. And I was in that situation. I pretended that everything was okay, that I wouldn't have to work anymore. I'd just stay in, even though my debts were piling up. So sometimes you need somebody else to give you a kick up the backside to tell you, and that, you're better off. A lot of people give people platitudes the whole time and say everything will be all right. They're actually not doing their friends any favors whatsoever. I always feel it's best to be honest. Your life is a complete mess. You've got to you drink too much, to be totally honest. Otherwise, they're not going to solve their problem. And you sometimes need somebody like that. And in my case, it was my wife who threatened to kick me out unless I got a job, because I was just, not even got up sometimes I was lying in bed till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and she couldn't put up with that. So sometimes you do need somebody to give you a kick up the arse. And I had no choice, basically. But of course, she did me an enormous favor, because I then, although I had written to companies offering my services, and people thought I was joking, they really did. Why would I employ Gerard Ratner, with all this stigma around him? So I realized I had to be my own boss. And I found a site in Henley, near where I lived, where in 1997 there wasn't a health club in the whole town. And although now everybody's at the gym and everybody's into health, in those days we didn't go to the gym so much or anything like that. Or we didn't really realise the benefit of exercise. But I could see the benefit that it was giving me because it was the one thing that was making me feel better. So I found a site which was 65,000 a year, but they wouldn't let me rent it because of the fact that they felt that my covenant wasn't good enough. If I went bust, it would revert to the landlords. In fact, I had 2,500 shops previous year. Irrelevant to them. They just felt I was a loser, and this is what people look at, black and white. So, but I got round it by saying, well, can I buy the freehold, which was £750,000, which of course I didn't have. I was totally skint then, you know. I'd lost everything, and I had debts as well and tax bills. But anyway, I bought I put the freehold in solicitor's hands with no way of completing on the deal. But what I did do is I told everybody that I bought it, and I put an advert in the local paper offering membership and even waiving the joining fee, which was very generous of me considering I hadn't bought the place. But on the basis of the advert in the paper, and also showing a artificial impression of how the club was going to look, I got 750 people to sign up with their direct debits for a club that didn't exist. But I went back to the bank, and they still wouldn't lend me the money. But I eventually found a bank manager who surprisingly, actually, people say he only lent me the money because his wife was one of the people that had signed up for the club. And it was very successful. I got 2,500 members, and I sold it, as I said, for £4 million. And I didn't even have to pay tax on that consideration because of the fact that I'd lost so much money in the past on my shares, so I could offset it. So it absolutely saved my life, that club.
Joe, maybe just share a little bit, kind of, beforehand, like maybe 6 months before, like that gym idea, what was the mindset, and like took us through the lead up into that, because that's such a phenomenal story. But just talk us through where you were kind of coming into that, because that's so ballsy, that's unbelievable.
Well, by then, because I'd been given this ultimatum that I had to get a job.
Yeah,
I threw in the gym because that was successful, but I had 2 failures before that. And you are going to have that. There's no way that your first venture is going to come off. My nephew was in tears the other day because he'd been turned down for a job. I said, how many times have you applied? He said, 6 people, I've applied, companies, and each one turned them. I said, that's good, because the average is 8 times you get turned away. And that's the same with starting a business or anything you do. So it's nothing wrong with actually failing and then getting out on your feet and trying again. And I'd failed. The first thing that I did before the gym, and when I got out of bed to try and work, was I was offered a job running a French jewelry company by NatWest, who had taken over the business because it had gone bust.
Yeah.
And they wanted to put somebody in to run it, and they had faith in me doing it. So I learned French, which, by the way, when I got to France, nobody seemed to understand a word I said. So I don't know. They said I'd learned the wrong French. I should have learned corporate French, which is typical French. But you learn that in every country there's a different culture, and you've got to adapt to it. But it was a complete and utter disaster. Basically, it was very difficult running a company that you couldn't understand what anybody says, and they couldn't understand you. And sooner or later, the management all got together and told NatWest that I was totally unsuitable, which I was, in fairness. So that didn't work. I then was approached by a company who'd taken over Tobacco Dock, which is was a shopping centre somewhere between Canary Wharf and the Tower of London. And they wanted to turn this into a factory outlet like you've got in Bicester.
Yeah.
But so I did that, and I can honestly say I didn't let one shop. I got everybody in because I had this reputation. They came to look at it, and I had all the top names all the big brands, but nobody would take it for the simple reason that you don't open a factory outlet in London, even though it wasn't West End. It's still London. You have to be out in the middle of nowhere. So it had a basic flaw that it was a hopeless situation. So I had two massive failures, and I had already, had lost my job at Ratner's and everything like that. So I wasn't exactly on a roll. And that's why I thought, forget it. I'm not going to do anything with anybody else. I'm going to do it on my own. And that way I had control. And that's why the health club. And I then went on to, after selling the health club for £4 million, I then put
maybe the maybe I'd love if you could share a little bit on the emotions of like when that was working, how that felt. That's when the health club, when you could see, from 700, it took us through a little bit the rise of the health club and how that was, making you feel.
It was just fantastic because, albeit this company was nothing like, it was just a one health club. And here, before that, I'd running 2,500 shops, very high profile. That business was nothing, bore no resemblance in size or anything to my previous business. But I was actually happier running it because of the fact that I think when you're running a very big business, you have to delegate. So you end up doing far less than you want to do, and everybody's doing everything else. So it was quite fun to actually being hands-on with the health club. And I was doing show rounds, and what I do, and the most important thing I've learned in business is selling. We're selling all the time. We're selling now. People forget that. And that's why when people send me emails and want to get me on Google on page one, all that stuff, I don't dismiss them because I admire somebody for making an effort to. So I was selling, and I was taking people, showing people around the gym, very enthusiastic. And I always feel if the owner is hands-on, is on the shop floor, people really appreciate that. And I was still pretty well known. And if you go to a restaurant and the owner's walking around and asking you how the meal is and stuff like that, or the main chef or whatever comes out, rather than some faceless person, I always think that is a huge achievement. But I had learned with the health club, and what really made me feel great about it is the reason why, one of the reasons, because all health clubs are pretty much the same. So why was this one so successful? Why did everybody want to join it? Because the health club is all about shouting from the rooftops, getting everybody to know that health club exists. And I learned for the first time that actually, however bad that speech was, whatever damage it did, that it actually meant that people knew about the health club much more than they did, because of the fact that there was even a program, Trouble on the Top, on that health club. Everyone was talking, that Gerard Ratner, that idiot who, called his jewelry crap, he's opening a health. But people talked about it. I mean, if you're in that business, that's what you want. And so there is a certain amount, everyone says on Twitter, they're saying that all publicity is good publicity.
Yeah.
Gerard Ratner. Well, there is some truth that, you can. So I learned for the first time that I could use this massive negative into some sort of positive. I could turn it round to use the publicity, albeit diabolical publicity, to my advantage, because people wouldn't be put off. It's not like they're buying a diamond ring. They could see the quality of the health club. It has machines and swimming pool and all that sort of stuff. And so there was no question whatsoever that it was very successful because of the fact that everybody knew that it existed, because it wasn't exactly in the most prominent location.
That's incredible. And Joe, could you share a little bit on kind of impact on kind of family, like you said, from the very low, difficult times up until, when things started to roll again, how that shifted and maybe just some sharing on that?
Well, it was difficult. And that's the thing, obviously. There were two things that really depressed me. One was that a lot of young managers who I'd taken on in their early 20s and said that I'd given them a chance had lost their jobs. And that was very painful. The other thing was taking my kids out of school, moving house. I had to sell my house. I had a lovely house on the river in Bray. I had to move. And I remember somebody saying they're really glad, the press, the newspaper, I think one of the tabloids was saying, is so glad that he now doesn't have a view of the river. He has a view of a wall or something. Because I bought a house for that. For about, I didn't have any money, but I bought a house for £350,000, and my bank manager in those days just lent me £350,000 for the whole amount. I don't know why. It's just on an overdraft. So yeah, but moving into that house, I couldn't care less. I've never been bothered by material things, but it was for my wife and my family. You always want the best for them, and I'd always given them that, and suddenly I wasn't in that situation anymore. So that was so that's what, again, I don't like to keep repeating myself, but when I did move back into a bigger house, you really appreciate it, you know. I used to travel first class. I even had my own private plane and all that sort of stuff, but it didn't really, you didn't say, oh, isn't this wonderful? I'm really enjoying this journey on my plane and stuff like that, or I'm in first class, how fabulous. But now, if I go club class or something like that, I really, you know, do think that I'm going to enjoy this. You do, only because I'd lost it all, and I didn't have anything, you know, for 7 years. I hadn't gone on holiday for 7 years.
And then, Gerald, from the next bit, when did you know it was time to sell the gym, and took us through the next ventures after that?
Right. So I found a site to go to a second site in Beaconsfield, which turned out to be a great site. And so I wanted to expand it. But then I think it was LA Fitness that came along, and they offered me initially 3 million. And I also discovered that I wouldn't be paying tax on it because I'd lost so much money, and my accountant said, you just offset your losses. And it was very tempting because of the fact, even though this club was successful, I wasn't drawing any money out of it. Yeah. So I was still skint, even though I had this asset. And then somebody else came along, and they were having a bit of a fight for it, who's a private individual who paid 3.9 million. And incidentally, just to reiterate the fact that it was my notoriety that made it successful, when I sold it, it went bust. It no longer, anybody was just another gym. So there was no question about that. I could now see the benefit of, even though nobody would believe it, the benefit of the speech. So yeah, I couldn't just resist the fact that I'd been without any money for all those years, and somebody putting it in my hand, and it was a very high price.
Yeah.
For one club. But on my last day in the club, I got a phone. I was saying goodbye to people, and it was the turn of the century, and one of the members was a guy called Jurek Piasecki, who was the chairman of Goldsmiths, the second largest jewelers. And he said, what are you going to do for your next trick? So I said, well, I'm going to go on holiday. But he said, well, why don't you go back into the jewelry business, and this time on the internet? Because it could work, because if you've just proved your notoriety, and that's what the internet is all about at that time. If you announce you're going back in jewelry business, you get a lot of publicity, which I did. But actually, basically, the backers felt that the internet was not, I know it sounds ridiculous what I'm about to say, but it's true. They felt that nobody would ever buy anything on the internet. Another great forecast. And that's why I never listened to accountants' forecasts and stuff like that. Nobody can predict the future. So anyway, yeah, in the end, I got a guy in India to back me, only on the basis that he would supply product. He was a manufacturer. And he put in 2 million, I put in 2 million, but I had to buy his product. And we built that up around 2003 to 25 million turnover. And it it was good because of the fact that if you're into something early on, to get onto Google on the first page in those days was free because there was no competition for jewelry. So you were right plastered all over the thing. And I was doing things, publicity stunts. Like I knew one way I'd get a huge amount of publicity is if I went back to the Albert Hall. So I actually emailed the chief executive of the Institute of Directors. I said, why don't you have me back? So I went back. It was on News at 10.
That's fantastic.
Incidentally. So, and then I plugged my, I was getting down this route of this whole disaster that happened to me. I was using it for my benefit. I'd still do it to this day when I do after dinner speeches. Anyway, so because if I did an after dinner speech, I never made that speech. It wouldn't have been much of an after dinner speech. Speeches like any other businessman. So I got a huge amount of free publicity. We were doing 25 million sales online. But nowadays, the cost of marketing yourself, unless you're Amazon, is so prohibitive that pay-per-clicks to buy the word eternity ring is actually going to cost you 25% of your sales. So now is not the time to be selling jewelry online. It was the time at the beginning. So you need to get into something at the beginning rather than at the end when everybody's there.
What was there a little bit, Gerald, of when you talk about it now, there is like kind of embracing what happened, because like you said, it made you like stronger. What would anybody else who's kind of going through like a reputational impact? What else would you share? I mean, you're so like open and sharing your vulnerability like with us today, so we're super grateful on it. But what else would you say to anybody, or just to recap some of it, who is going through that reputational kind of impact?
Well, the thing is that as I mentioned to you before, that I do a lot of after dinner speeches, and that's again only because of the fact that I made that speech in 1991, and I've been doing it for 20 years. And there was a time I was doing 50 to 100 a year. There was once I did 4 in one day, and I was earning a lot of money doing public speaking. So who would have believed that somebody who made the worst speech in corporate history made a living out of making that is life to me. I've learned that enormously. But when I was at one of the events, sometimes you don't get questions. Nobody wants to ask the first question. So we plant a question. So the chief executive of this large firm, which I was doing a speech for, said, "What do you want me to plant?" Asked me whether I regret saying what I said. So nobody asked a question. He got up and he says, "Gerald, do you regret saying what you said?" And I said, "That's the most stupid question you've ever asked me. How ridiculous. I lost absolutely everything. I lost my business that I loved, the biggest jewelers in the world. I'd cracked America, and I lost it over a stupid joke." Well, question, of course I regret it. But he says, "But you're happier now. Okay, you're not as rich." I said, "Well, I'd rather be rich and not as happy. But yeah, you're right. My life is better now. I can cycle 25 miles a day, which I still do to this day, and I never could do that. I go for long walks. I don't have to meet brokers' forecasts. I've got enough money to have a nice lifestyle. I appreciate things much more." Do you know something? I'm sorry I said that to you, that it's the most stupid question. I wouldn't go as far as to say that I don't regret saying what I said. I wouldn't go that far. But there's always a silver lining. So that's what I'd say to anybody else who loses their job. It will make you better. I prefer traveling on the underground than being driven around in a chauffeur-driven Bentley. Don't ask me why, but that's what I do.
At what point, Gerald, did, going through when you spoke about the French jewelry chain and the shopping center thing, we talk about, like you talk about your losing the mojo and getting the mojo back. Can you maybe share a little bit, like when you were kind of out, like hustling again, trying to make it work? At what point was it kind of just fun being out there again, or was that still such a graft trying to like overcome that? Like, can I do it again? Can I still make it happen?
Well, if you don't face up to your problems, that is the most difficult thing. It's far worse. The fear of having to do that and go out there and to meet people again it is far worse than it actually is in reality. The first step you've got to do is cross that threshold and go out there. And when you go out there, you find it's nothing like as bad as it was. Are you still there, Mark? I'm still here, but I don't know if Mark's still here. I'm sure he'll come back. So what I would say is that he's coming back. You're back. You disappeared for a second.
Just checking you're awake, Gerard. I was just keeping you on your toes.
I didn't say anything particularly exciting. Don't worry about it. You didn't. I say in football, you didn't miss anything while I was watching. But no, the first step and the biggest step is what if you've got a situation you're scared of. It's far worse sitting at home being fearful of it. When you actually step out there and face it, confront it, it's nowhere near as bad. People are not. It's not going to, put barriers up the way you think they're going to do. And it's much easier to solve these problems. You won't solve them by pretending they don't exist and ignoring them. So the first step, however difficult it is to pick up the phone, speak to somebody, get out there. You will be rejected. But yeah, it is, I was, like for 7 years, I felt like everyone was having a party, and the best party is always the one you're not invited to. And that's what I felt like, that this was a fabulous party going on. And there was a bit of truth in that because people were doing very well in the 90s. You heard about all these stories and the tech thing had taken off and people were making millions. And I was on my bike. I was out of it. And you felt really left out of it, because I'm a businessman. That's what I love doing best. Some people do other things, but that's what I do. And it's a bit like a pianist who's broken all his fingers. It's very frustrating.
And Gerard, what's on the agenda at the moment? What's next? What still drives you?
Well, my mother used to say to me that she believes that you have to leave your house in the morning, be out and somewhere different, and come back in the evening. That's what you have to do. So that's why I carry on working, although now everybody's working from home, which don't get me on that, because to me, it's difficult to get work ethic unless you do what my mother says and leave. But after retiring for 7 years, when I was 42, after I lost my job, I've had my retirement. I'm now going to, I'll be 73 in a couple of weeks, and I'm looking forward to working for the next 10 or 20 years. And I was recently mentoring, which I do a lot of, in the Cayman Islands. It's a lovely place, the most wonderful place to mentor. And it was all young people, and it was our day off because we did the mentoring during the week, and on the Sunday we lay on the beach. But I was offered a speech in Dallas. So all these young people who just took it easy, they said, what you really need a rest now, Gerard, after this. I said, well, I can't have a rest because I'm going to Dallas to do a speech. And they thought I was mad at my age that I would do that. But I loved it. And what made it really exciting is I nearly got stuck there. And I wouldn't be able to get back to the mentoring. But all of that is what I love, is the excitement of being busy using your brain. Now, as much as I talked about exercise and cycling that saved my life, you've also got to exercise your brain. And if you're sitting at home or you're retired or you're playing golf, you're not exercising your brain. And you're only happy when you're exercising your brain, when you're pitting your wits against somebody else, when you're playing chess. That is just as the endorphins that you get from your exercise, you get a high from the challenges of using your brain. People talk a lot about their body and Joe Wicks and all that stuff. Nobody ever talks about exercising your brain.
Right.
It's far more important.
Tell me a little bit about the mentoring, Gerald. Like what do you enjoy kind of giving back or sharing? I mean, that's,
Well, I like you know, one thing that I've learned with my doing all the after dinner speeches, the conference speeches, is I get to, I'm privy to their meetings, and I learn a lot from other companies being out there. So mentoring, I fascinated when I talk to all these people that are all in different businesses I know nothing about, you know, but that doesn't stop me giving my threepence worth and telling them what I think. I mean, there's a guy that he does fantastic, and there's a lot of businesses that I've learned that, you know, you read in the press the whole time about these high-tech businesses and the brilliant apps that people produce and how much they make, but a lot of people that I talk to, basically old school, doing things like pallets or travel agents or something like that. But basically, the same rules apply. And what it is there isn't a quick fix solution to all of these things. To be successful, to be an overnight success, you've actually had to work for 20 years, learn your trade, and then suddenly you wake up one morning and you will be an overnight success. But I don't believe in this happening suddenly. And this is what I tell people, that they have a huge advantage of actually being an expert in their trade, not being a jack of all trades, but actually being better, because there's so many people that will try and compete with them that don't know the ins and outs. I mean, the thing I learned about the jewelry business, I worked in the shop, and I realized that to display a diamond ring, you had to display it at 42 inches from the ground, because the average woman was 5'4", and the trajectory of her eye would fall at 42 inches. The most important thing is that that diamond ring looks good because it's in an ideal situation. People forget that. The reason I bought H. Samuel is because they brought in designers who put the diamond rings on the top shelf, because they knew nothing about the jewelry business. But I had learned from working in the shop from the age of 15. So it's simply that I tell people that I'm mentoring, just be an expert in your field and you'll make loads of money doing that. And there isn't, you know, it isn't a question of balance sheets or accountancy or all that sort of stuff. I've never been particularly good with balance sheets or anything like that. I've never understood them. That's probably why I came unstuck. No, that wasn't why I came unstuck.
Gerald, it's been like so insightful, and thank you so much for sharing on the call today. That's been, you know, a wonderful shared experience and such an incredible story. Hugely grateful for your time today. We definitely look forward to keeping in touch and seeing you on a bike ride, hopefully sometime soon.
Mark, that's so nice. Loved your questions. Love looking at your smiley face. The most important thing in the health club that I learned was to smile at the customer, and you've been smiling the entire hour, which makes my life a lot easier. So thanks.
Gerard, you're very kind. Gerald, thank you very much. Have a beautiful day, and we'll catch up very soon.
Look forward to it, Mark.
Thanks, Gerald. All the best.
Bye.